And just to clarify, you were speaking tomorrow at Richmond Christian School.
Right.
In Richmond. And what time are you speaking there? Just so folks don't show up here.
What time am I speaking? I think it's 10:30. I'm guessing that.
Okay, and you'll cover more of that. I just wanted to clarify in case you were thinking we were continuing tomorrow morning here. Okay, let's go with questions then. Yes?
How did the head of the skeptics respond to your refutation of what he was saying?
Well, Michael Shermer is not only a skeptic, in my opinion.
The question is, how did Michael Sherman, head of the Skeptic Society, respond to Dr. Ross's refutation of Genesis 1?
Yeah, I was disappointed. Because I've debated him 4 times, and every single time he says, well, of course Hugh Ross says these things because he was raised in a Christian home. He's simply defending the faith of his upbringing. He knows full well I was not raised in a Christian home. He knows full well I didn't really get to have a spiritual conversation with a Christian until 8 years after I became a Christian. But he keeps repeating this false story that I'm simply defending the faith of my parents. When it's quite the opposite. Now, my parents did become Christians, but it was about 30 years after I became a Christian that they became Christians. And he does the same thing with this material on Genesis. Even though I've pointed out for him, for example, because he keeps saying Genesis 1:1 says that God created the earth and the universe at the same time. I've sat down with him 3 different times, explained to him there is no Hebrew word for universe. And the Shamayim Ores is referring to all of physical reality. And there's a text in Isaiah which distinguishes between God creating the heavens and forming the earth. But he keeps repeating that claim. Just like he keeps repeating the claim that there's a contradiction on the flood, because in one text it says, take 7 pairs of animals on board the ark. The other text it says, just take 1 pair. It says, how can you believe a book that contradicts itself in 1 paragraph? Well, any of you who have read the account of the flood realize what the text says is, for these animals, take 14. For these other animals, 2 is all you need. And the ones where he said 14, it's basically those that are named in Job 38 and 39. It says you're going to need more of those than you need of these others. So, in that sense, I was disappointed. But there's a reason why he's the president of the Skeptic Society.
Next question over here, yes.
8 minutes ago at the end of your lecture, you said that man is body, soul, and spirit, as God is body, soul, and spirit. Jesus said in John 4, God is spirit, we are to worship him in spirit and in truth. Where do you see God as a body? I don't quite understand.
Well, I'm referring to Colossians, which makes the point that the fullness of the deity resides in bodily form in the second person of the Trinity. I completely concur that the Holy Spirit and the Father does not have any physical body. It's the Son that has the physical body, not the Father and not the Holy Spirit. But in that context, I think it's appropriate for God to say he created man in his image. And we're the only species in his image, and we're the only species of life here on planet Earth that has a spiritual dimension to us. And so that's what's my basis for saying body, soul, and spirit. Likewise, we are body, soul, and spirit. But the body part is just a reference to the second person of the triune God. Now, there may be more to the Spirit of God than that. In fact, I would argue that another component of the image of God that is on upon us as human beings is that it seems like we tend to create along the same pattern that God creates. And so God was one that put a desire for creativity in every human being. So I think that too is part of the image of God. However, it says of Jesus Christ that only he is the exact representation of God. So the image of God doesn't mean we're like God. It just simply means we have a few of the characteristics that God enjoys and manifests.
Thank you. Over here, yes, in the blue, the gently. Oh, okay, go ahead.
Okay, I think I got it. What she's referring to is something I said in my first lecture, how the Bible in 7 different places says that the laws of physics are constant from the time of creation until God removes evil. And the question she's asking is, well, weren't the laws of physics somehow altered at the fall of Adam and maybe at the flood? And often that conclusion is drawn from a passage in Genesis 3:17, which says that God had cursed the ground. And isn't that a reference to God actually changing physics when he cursed the ground? But if you actually read the whole verse, it says, "Cursed is the ground because of you," referring to Adam and Eve. So it's making the point that the agricultural land is not going to be as productive as it once was, because now we're going to have sinful human beings managing that agricultural land. So as I interpret that text, it's not that God changed the physics of the soil. Is that now we get sinful human beings managing the soil, and therefore it's not as productive as it otherwise would be. And I draw that conclusion because there's so many other passages that are quite explicit, no change in the laws of physics. The laws of physics are there, as I explained last night at the Vancouver Club. They're in place as tools in God's hands to eliminate evil and suffering once and for all. And therefore he's not going to change the laws of physics until evil and suffering are gone forever. That's the purpose of, say, thermodynamics, and electromagnetism, and gravity.
Okay, and in your mind, a quick answer, the flood, universal, limited?
Well, in terms of the extent of the flood, I don't think we have the DVD here, but we produced one just a few months ago where I talked about the flood of Noah. Is it global or worldwide? And see, from a 20th century perspective, or 21st century perspective, we say, hey, they're identical. But if you actually research the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation and examine every text that speaks about a worldwide event, in every single case, it's less than a globe. So the flood impacted the entire world of humanity. But since humanity had not yet settled Antarctica and Greenland, there was no need for God to flood Antarctica or Greenland. So in our model of the flood, there are no emperor penguins on board the ark. And the principle there you can draw from the book of Leviticus is that it's the soulish animals, the higher animals, that can be damaged by human sin. You can sin all you want in front of a cockroach, it has no effect on the behavior of the cockroach. But if you sin in front of your cow, you can affect the behavior of the cow. And it's not that these animals are sinful, rather that God has designed them to be highly motivated to please us. So for example, if you have an evil man with a dog, that dog wants to please the man by being vicious, because that's what brings pleasure to the man, so the dog just does what's going to bring pleasure to its owner. Which is why it says in the Levitical law, if a cow is in the habit of goring other animals or people, the owner of the cow is to be spoken to. And if the cow persists in that behavior, the cow is to be destroyed and the owner along with it. Making the point that the owner is responsible for that behavior, that animal. But the whole point is, in terms of God's flood judgment on human reprobate behavior, it's limited to the human beings and all the soulish animals that are associated with human beings.
Okay, okay, I'm only allowed one question. All right, let's go over here. Okay, let's take questions.
What role does...
Please give the microphone to the people.
Sure, okay. Yeah, or we'll try to repeat the questions. Go ahead.
Okay.
What role does God currently play in the sustaining of creation?
What role does God currently play in the sustaining of creation?
That's a good question, because often skeptics will say, when it comes to divine miracles, show me proof of a miracle, but they have a different definition of a miracle. They define a miracle equivalent to Jesus walking on water. And say, I want to see a transcendent miracle, and say, well, I can show you one through the space-time theories. This is where God creates all matter, energy, space, and time. That is a transcendent miracle. But as you read the Bible, you discover that God claims 3 different kinds of miraculous interventions. One is where he intervenes beyond the laws of physics, like walking on water. Much more frequently, he works within the laws of physics. So, for example, we have the event of a Deborah, where there's a torrential rainstorm at the bottom of Mount Tabor and it's dry on top. That would not happen without God's intervention. You know, those of you living here realize it always rains much more intensely in the mountains than it does here in the flatlands. If you want a dry climate, you want to live in Richmond, Missouri, right? You don't want to live in North Vancouver. So that's the way the laws of physics works, but God can intervene within the laws of physics and bring about a great miracle. Far more frequently, again, are the miracles that you see described in Colossians 1, where it says God sustains. And through his miraculous intervention, he holds all the laws of physics together. And so, yeah, God's at rest from his transcendent miracles, from his transformational miracles, but he's not resting from his sustaining miracles. In fact, in the book of Job, it says if God were to withdraw his sustaining of creation, each of us would breathe our last breath. We can't even breathe another breath without God's intervention support. But it's at a level that's different from the transcendent miracles and the transformational miracles. Now, it doesn't mean that God's not doing transcendent miracles and transformational miracles today. He's simply not doing them in the arena of creation activity. So he's still doing transformational miracles and transcendent miracles in the life of every human being. So yeah, he's working miracles today, but they're not creation miracles. The reason why God has that seventh day of rest, he's targeting the problem of evil and suffering. And when that accomplishment has been done, then we move into the eighth day. That's something you see in John 5, where Jesus is criticized for performing a miracle on the Sabbath. And his response back to the Pharisees, you do not understand the Sabbath. On the Sabbath, you cease from certain things to focus on other things. He says, you all feed your children on the Sabbath. You just stop your normal employment. And the principle of the Sabbath is that we focus on the spiritual arena. So we take one day a week to go to church and to focus on the most important issues of life. And we stop our employment so we can give that due attention, just like God does with the problem of evil and suffering. Now, it doesn't mean that God has to stop all activity. He gave us that as an example to follow.
Okay. Go ahead.
Just a question. You haven't touched on the Revelation, about the book of Revelation. And when you get into Revelation, all kinds of stuff is written there about what's going to happen.
Right.
It's not a question per se, but do you have any comments about the Revelation in light of your research and what you see?
Can you relate anything from the Revelation in light of your work in astronomy?
Well, I did talk about the book of Revelation last night, making the point that in Christianity we have a two-creation model. God creates his universe as a tool in his hand to eliminate all evil and suffering, not just for humanity's benefit, but also for the benefit of the angelic realm. And then once that task has been accomplished, God will replace his universe with a brand new realm, the new creation, which is described in some detail in Revelation 21 and 22. Now, the first 19 chapters of Revelation basically summarize all the Old Testament prophetic books. So, for example, in my church, I was asked by the pastoral team if I could teach a course on the book of Revelation. And I said, I'll do it in one condition, that you first allow me to teach all the Old Testament texts that deal with what Revelation summarizes. Well, it turned out that we had to teach on 1/3 of the entire Bible. And so it took us 7.5 years to get through all that content. And it's lovingly referred to in our church as the Great Tribulation.
Okay,
But you know what? You can get on MP3s an entire 7-year, 9-month class.
Over here, final question, Dr. Hugh, you're going to stick around.
Yes, I'll stick around.
And of course, you're going to stick around to talk with people. They might have some other questions. But you're back tonight, 7 to 8:30.
Right.
You're going to share more. It's more going to be a testimony versus a lecture, kind of combined.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit. And how you came to trust the God of the Bible from your learnings. We're going to look forward, and that's a great time to invite people. Steve, we're going to give you this last question here, since we share the same name.
One of the pushbacks on some of the fine tuning and some of the probabilities is some of the multiverse concepts. Can you just comment on that for a moment?
Can you talk about the idea of multiverse universe? Like there are multi-universes instead of just this one?
Yeah, I describe this in my book More Than a Theory, that the appeal to the multiverse on behalf of skeptics and atheists is a demonstration of just how powerful the scientific case for biblical creationism must really be. I mean, given the compelling nature of some of the evidence you heard today, where else is an atheist going to go except the multiverse? It's the only option they got left. But the multiverse is self-defeating. Because what the multiverse, and by the way, my colleague Jeff Zurich, another astronomer on staff, has written a book called Who is Afraid of the Multiverse? And he makes the point in that booklet that the multiverse actually is compatible with the Christian faith. It was medieval theologians that said nothing less than an infinite universe would befit an infinite God. So the atheists are really borrowing a concept from medieval Christianity. But what my colleague Jeff documents in his booklet is that the multiverse is only consistent from a Christian perspective. From an atheistic perspective, it's contradictory, it's self-defeating. Now, I give a summary of that in my book, More Than a Theory, which is out there at the table. And it works like this. The atheist is saying we can bypass all this fine-tuning evidence if we have a large enough sample size. What if there's an infinite number of universes? And what if in those infinite number of universes we see all possibly conceived combinations of different values of the laws of physics and different constants that govern the physics and different features of the universe? And technically that requires an infinite number of an infinite number of universes. So it's not just a single order infinity. However, the problem with that model is it explains too much. In that model, you not only would have an infinite number of universes, you'd have an infinite number of planets, just like planet Earth. You'd have an infinite number of beaches on those infinite number of planets. And those infinite number of beaches, you have an infinite number of markings in the sands of those beaches. And in those infinite number of markings in the sands of the beaches, you'd find one beach where you would have all the letters in the latest paper produced by Lawrence Krauss. Which means that paper is simply the product of pure chance, not the product of the mind. So that's what I mean that it's self-defeating. You're basically saying everything is the product of pure chance, nothing is the product of the mind, nothing is the product of creativity, but no scientist believes that. And so they're willing to concede that they're an intelligent being with consciousness. They have to concede that there's an intelligent, conscious being that's behind all this fine-tuning in the universe. That's just one of 7 problems with the atheistic model of the multiverse. And one thing you'll see in More Than a Theory is that it's technically possible to come up with scientific proof against the atheistic multiverse model. But it's impossible to ever prove that it's correct. Which is why a number of scientists have come out saying the multiverse model formulated by atheists is not science. Because it's impossible to ever come up with an observation, experiment, test, and prove it. However, as I've written, it is conceivable that we could come up with a test to disprove it. So, for example, if we were to prove that the universe had a certain geometry to it, it would eliminate the physical possibility of an infinite number of universes. But something that the atheists themselves concede in all their multiverse models, they're all still subject to the Borde-Vilenkin-Gu theorem. They do not eliminate the need for God. They're simply an attempt to eliminate the need for a personal God. You're still stuck with a being beyond space and time that creates the infinite number of universes.
Wow. Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Hugh Ross, for speaking to us this afternoon. And, I want to thank all of you for